and Two-Spirit LGBTQIA+. And so I want to welcome you here. My name is Alicia DeMesa. I'm Associate Director of Project Humanities. And on behalf of our entire Project Humanities team, welcome, welcome. We want to take you and just remind you of some of the things that we stand for. And before we do that, and one of the things we actually stand for is acknowledging the lands that our institution, Arizona State University, are on. We want to acknowledge that Arizona State University and its locations are situated on the ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples, past, present, future. We definitely thank all of the Native American tribes and sovereign nations of the Salt River Valley where we're situated. That includes the Acamel Otham, the Anacamel Otham, and the Pupash peoples, whose stewardship of the land and waterways allow us to be here now. And we also want to honor their continued and many contributions today and in the future. Land acknowledgements are just a small token, and it's just a small step, and it's certainly not enough. So we want to encourage all of you to get to know who are our 22 tribes in Arizona federally recognized, and who are the peoples of your land as well. One of the things that Project Humanities is always about are Humanity 101 principles. And so our 101 principles are listed on our website. Number one, we're having a little trouble here with the slides. Here we go. And for those of you who have taken the pledge, we encourage you to just think about, what are the principles here? Again, are you living them every day? And that's really what these principles are about. They're not religious, they are secular, and they are a way of being, let's call it a good human being. And so compassion, empathy, forgiveness, integrity, kindness, respect, self-reflection. These are the principles that are very near and dear to all of us. And if you are willing to take that pledge for Humanity 101, we encourage you to go to our website. You can find it at tinyurl.com, Human 101 Pledge, and you can officially sign for the pledge. And so at this point, I am going to hand this over to our very great, well-loved Dr. Neil Lester as our founding director.
Thank you, Associate Director Alicia. And thank you all for coming this evening, this morning, wherever you are, whatever time it is. I am delighted that you have chosen to join us. I know that there are a lot of places you could be, but you, for whatever reason, decided to be here with us. So we are grateful as the Project Humanities team. When I mentioned this to someone else today, who is aging also, as we all are, the person said, "Oh, I think about aging all the time. I don't want to do that. That's not going to be much fun." And I beg to differ here. I think this can be a conversation that is both enlightening, and I think it could actually be quite joyful. Fun, don't know about the fun part, but I think we could have fun doing conversations about what people refuse or don't want to move toward. Aging is still taboo. Let me tell you how it came to be this conversation that I'll introduce our esteemed panel of experts. I have in-laws who moved here from New York for senior living. And I notice even as I name that senior living, I hope we'll get into how we talk about aging and old people and people who are old. But when we brought them here and we were looking from New York, and we were looking for spaces for memory care and for independent living, what my spouse and I noticed is that the more expensive these places were, the whiter they were. And also the lower price they were, they were brown and black, and there was more diversity there. But what was consistent in both of those, at the high end and the low end and the middle, was the fact that every picture, every brochure, every packet that we got was full of heterosexual couples. And talking to some of the folks there, it was clear that either a wife had died or husband had died. And I wondered, where is the space for those who are Two-Spirit LGBTQIA+. So that was the germ of this. The other part of this is I'm also recognizing that I have gray hair, and I watch people pluck gray hairs. And I even had family members ask me if I was going to dye my hair. this really is a conversation we need to have about aging, but two intersectional marginalities. And that's what this conversation is about. So, I have some stuff I need to work through about what I can and can't do because of aging. And I have to work through this whole notion of hair dyeing. I know that's a very gendered conversation. But here are the people who are going to lead us, guide us through this conversation tonight. And I'll be chiming in as the spirit moves, and I hope you will do that as well. So in the chat, please tell us where you're joining us from so that we can get a sense of who we're talking to tonight. But facilitating this panel tonight is the very abled professor at University of Arizona's Public Health School College is Dr. Amanda Shokan. She is a research assistant professor of internal medicine and geriatrics and holds a PhD in gerontology and a master's in healthcare administration from the University of Kentucky and a law degree from the University of Buckingham in England. Her interests straddle that kind of nexus of gerontology, healthcare, and law, including elder rights and justice, elder abuse and mistreatment, cultural competence, LGBTQ plus aging, long-term care, aging, and healthcare navigation, health promotion, well-being, and on and on and on, and considers herself an applied gerontologist. So I could think of no other person who is more qualified to sort of guide us through these nuances of aging and these multiple intersectional identities. So thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Shokan. As panelists, we had Trudy Jackson. There we go. We still have Trudy Jackson, is an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation, a community advocate, trailblazer for social and racial justice, who will share her voice and has shared her voices as a two-spirit transgender woman of color. Trudy Jackson shares her lived experiences of growing up on the Navajo Nation, then transplanted to the Valley of the Sun here in Phoenix in the early 1980s, shares some of the hurdles she has faced from finding employment, housing, incarceration, discrimination, stigma, and the stereotypes of American Indians, and very, very excited about having this perspective. That's the 2+ that we don't often see when we talk about LGBTQIA identity. So thank you very much, Trudy, for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for this conversation.
Thank you.
Lavina Tomer is a licensed massage therapist for 35 years before retirement. She is, and these biographies, by the way, were written by the folks. Okay, so this is their language. She is a lesbian feminist committed to activism on behalf of lesbians, women, and the LGBTQ plus community, and founder of the Wingspan Domestic Violence Project, now SAAF, Anti-Violence Project. Tomer worked to change state law to make LGBTQ plus domestic violence visible and to create critical resources. She has been a volunteer with Senior Pride in Tucson, Arizona since 2014, and executive director since 2018, leading the organization in its service to older adults and in its steady growth. So thank you, neighbor, down the street from us in Phoenix. Michelle Michaels is a 60+ white, cisgender, hard of hearing lesbian feminist whose pronouns are she, her, and hers. Her short hair is white and she wears glasses and hearing aids. And from the time she turned 8 in the 1960s in a small town in Kansas, she knew she was different. Discovering what that difference meant took years, but by the time she reached her teenage years, she had embraced political activism as a vehicle to further human and civil rights. And that activism continued as she made her way to Phoenix in the late 1980s, and from marching in gay pride parades in Kansas City to serving on the LGBT organization boards in Phoenix, Michelle has been an out and proud member of the beautiful and beloved Rainbow community. So thank you, Michelle. Michelle is also one of our investors in Project Humanities, so is a Humanity 101 founder. And
Happy to be here.
But not least is a Mr. Damon Evans, who is a singer and actor and a native of Baltimore, Maryland, and a graduate of the Interlochen Arts Academy in Brooklyn College, where he majored in Africana Studies. has an active career on Broadway, and television, and classical music, and many US audiences are familiar with his work as the second Lionel son of Wheezy and George Jefferson in the 1970s TV comic The Jeffersons. He also portrayed Alex Haley in the miniseries Roots: The Next Generation, which is still considered one of the 10 most watched miniseries in television history. He's taught voice and musical theater at Marymount Manhattan College and currently resides in Queens, New York with his husband and 2 dogs. So let's give our panelists a hand before they start, because we already know their stories are going to move us and shape us and challenge us. So I will at this point turn this right over to our facilitator, Dr. Amanda, and our panelists. So thank you all again. Have at it.
Amanda, you're muted.
Hello, everyone. Let me try this again, second take. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're really excited, the panel members and I want to start this off by setting a little bit of context, right, to help us. So you have to be living under a rock if you haven't heard of population aging. So we all know about that, right? So population's aging, older adults are increasing in number and in terms of the percentage of our population. And if you don't believe this, just a few numbers really quickly. Back in 1900, we had 3.1 million people who were 65 and older. By 1960, that number had gone to 16.2 million people. By 2019, 54.1 million. And it's projected to reach 94.7 million, almost 100 million if you wrap that around, by 2060. So definitely population's aging. One of the things that we probably don't do such a great job talking about is the fact that the population's increasing, but it's also getting more diverse, right? So we don't do a good job of talking about that. And if you look at some of the numbers, 2017, 1.1 million people who were aged 65 and older identified as LGBT. By 2060, we expect that number will be about 20 million. Now take these two numbers with a big bag of salt, because we know that they're likely underreported. So there's a bigger amount of people in our population who are LGBT. Now, if you think further, right, we just talked about sexual orientation and identity, but there's also an increase in race and ethnicity and different other elements of diversity, like ability as well, right? How are we going to start that conversation, right? This time tonight, we're making time for some real talk, for some real conversations, and our panel will help us navigate this fertile arena for conversations. And I want to start out with the very first question of the night, because there are many definitions to this. What does old mean to you, honorable panel members? Who wants to go first?
We'd also like our audience to tell us what old means to them also. So let's see those in the chat as our panelists are responding to Dr. Amanda's question. What is old? What constitutes old?
Oh, 80 plus, straight up, okay?
Um,
Oh, Trudy, go ahead, Trudy.
Are you sure? Just quickly, I'm thinking about someone old is, well, within the Native community, it's more or less like someone that is an elder. Okay. Most likely someone that has lived experience and that has earned their place in the community as a knowledge keeper. So basically, it's not really like a number, but just someone who has had lived experience. So that would be my response to that.
Thank you, Trudy. That's a great distinction. So first we had the numbers, so age as the passage of time and chronology. And then now we have age as lived experience and contributions to community, right? Okay, so yeah. Has status, one is just the passage of number. Any other views?
I agree with Trudy. I also think that we are historians. And I think one of the reasons I'm here and want to share my story is that it's important to share that history. Because when I came along, I know one of the questions was something about how do you feel about marginalization and aging. I was first marginalized within my family when I knew at the age of 4 I was gay. So, you know, this category, but I think it's very important, the Giro, I think in African culture, to pass on the history, because our young kids today in the LGBT community do not know their history. In the Black community, they do not know their history. It is important to know from whence we've come so that they really do appreciate where they are today, because they take so much for granted.
Thank you, Dermot. I think Michelle had her hand up at one point. Did you want to weigh in on the what is old question?
Yeah, what I see a lot of portrayals is old means lack of ability. So not just a different ability, but you can't.
Yes.
So you've got hearing aids, you've got glasses, you've got a cane, you're slumped over, you're walking slow, you're crabby, that kind of thing. And that may be true, but the negative perception is that this is going to happen to everybody and it's a bad thing, and pity that old person.
Thank you, Michelle. Lavina?
I just wanted to add that I think resilience is another adjective that we can give to older adults. And I grew up in a community with a lot of immigrants, and I saw their resilience and their fortitude. And I also want to say that they did not talk about their lived experience very much. And I can't even, I imagine why, but I don't know exactly why. But what they went through to get here to the United States was difficult, to say the least. And we did not hear that much about it. And I think that we might find that to be true across a lot of people's experiences. And we want that to be different in our community.
Yeah. Okay, so we've had old as the passage of time in terms of numbers from the chat. We've had old as lived experience. We've had old as history and story keepers, old as resilience. And I think I saw something on the chat that said old as an untapped resource, and one that talked about old seems like a destination. So let's stay with that whole destination thing for a minute. Would you say that the land of old age, if there was such a place, is inclusive? How inclusive is the land of old age, especially given some of the numbers that we started this conversation with?
I think if we are fortunate enough that we get to old age, that's something that we will experience if we have that.
All right, okay, that's one view. So if we're fortunate, and certainly old age, the land of old age is a place that you get to if you're fortunate and if you're blessed, right? So is it an equal space for all old people?
No, I don't think so.
No. So Michelle, I see you shaking your head vigorously.
No, I got sick some years back and had to spend some time in a skilled nursing facility, and I kept on the down low because I was afraid, and I was younger then, but as I get older, do I think that these places are going to be inclusive and okay for me? No, I don't think so.
When you also say getting there, I want to share with you that at the age of 36 in 1986, I was diagnosed with HIV. So I never expected to be alive right now. In 1986, just to have the virus in your blood system, which is all I had at the point, was a death sentence. I remember going, it was a routine exam. I remember going to the doctor and he said, there's an abnormality. Do you mind if we do an HIV test? And I said, no. And then when I came back and he said, you have the AIDS virus. And I looked at him and he just did like that and walked out the room. So from that moment until about the time I was 50, literally, I froze. I went in complete denial. I never expected to be alive today. I lived with being a gay Black man living with HIV. And by the time I was 50, I knew it still was a miracle I was alive. And I never let age stop any goal I set for myself. I just graduated with my bachelor's in 2019. But it's a miracle. And please, people, don't think that the stigma with HIV has been eliminated. It hasn't. There are a lot of people very ignorant. I am very grateful that someone like Billy Porter has become public about his diagnosis, and Javier Munoz, who's the sexy star of Hamilton. But when they were diagnosed, there was antivirals. They knew they were going to live. They knew there was hope for a lifespan. I didn't. It was a totally different journey. So I you know, just the aging itself, one day I wake up and I'm 50 and I'm still alive. So that's a miracle.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because the one thing that we do know is that not everyone's going to get to that land of old age. And then when you have really good reason to even wonder how long you're going to last, then that land seems even further for you. And that gives it a whole different sort of feel and sense and ethos for that experience. So thank you for sharing that with us and for helping us to remember that in a lot of ways, that land is special. And if that land is special, right, and the people who inhabit it are special, then it behooves us as a society to ensure that whoever gets to that land has an equal chance as everybody else to thrive and to do well while they're there, right? So I want us to talk a little bit about language, because so there's some words that have come out, right? So we've talked about Two-Spirit LGBTQIA people. We've used the word elder, right? There's power in words. So for instance, I know that in the gerontology field now, we're moving away from calling older adults elders, right? Or seniors. Does language matter? So our argument, or the argument that we've been given, is both words, senior or elder, have other connotations and meanings that you might not want to apply to a whole broad group of older adults. And so just call them who they are. They are adults who happen to be older, right? So I think this is a good space for us to talk about language and the power of words. Within the Two-Spirit LGBTQIA plus population, how do we feel about words and what do they mean to us? And what are the words that are important? Yes, Michelle? Oh, okay. Trudy, you want to? Trudy, Michelle.
Yeah, yes. I just want to say is that Two-Spirit is a terminology that is embraced by the community. And it was a group of Two-Spirit elders that really came together back in the early 1990s, because how individuals were referred to were more or less like a derogatory term. Some of them did not identify with the LGBTQIA acronym. And being Native and identifying as having a male and female spirit over as a two-spirit. So that was a term that is embraced. But also, you have to also remember is that you have to be careful on how you use it. It's more or less embraced in the urban spaces versus rural, and some tribes may not accept the term. Some individuals may prefer to use the language over of their tribal language instead. So more or less like decolonizing the term to reflect who they are. So that would be my response to that.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Michelle?
You know, I was going to say, in the community in which I grew up, the lesbian feminist community, the word is crone, C-R-O-N-E. So it's not old person, it's not elder, it's not senior, it's crone. And that was actually something great and wonderful to aspire to become a crone, to be that wise woman, to pass down, you know, that history or herstory, H-E-R, her story, to the younger lesbians coming up in our community. And I remember thinking, I want to be a crone, and I'm glad that I've gotten there, and I hope I get to be even more of a crone many more years. But that is something. And you know, when we were talking before this started, I remember saying, don't call me gay. I am not gay. I am not homosexual. I'm a lesbian. Use the L word, please. Because, you know, for so long, you know, lesbians were obscured under the gay word. It was gay, and it meant gay men. And I was, you know, I was involved with ACT UP and all that stuff. But, you know, I am a lesbian. I am not homosexual. I am not gay. And I know that Lavina had some really good comments about the use of the term queer.
Yes. So Lavina, do you want to weigh in on this? I think this is a great conversation, because how we're identified and how we choose to be identified has to be, or how we're called, right? Your name and what you choose to be and how you choose to be identified has to be the very first step of personhood, don't you think? Right? Having some control over that. So Lavina?
Just to add on to what Trudy and Michelle said, I find that it's so individual, because we found that there are lesbians in our community who prefer the term gay, that they grew up as gay girls in their generation, and they did not identify as lesbians, and they did not resonate with the term lesbian. So, I mean, there's just so much variation. And like Trudy was saying, two-spirit is used, it's embraced, but it doesn't apply to all tribes. And so I think that when we talk about language, and we need to let people identify themselves and how they identify. And elder, we talk about the term elder at Senior Pride, and some people know that it's a term of that for respect, and that acknowledges history and all the things that we've talked about. But other people don't resonate with that, and so, you know, it's just it's a navigation dance where, who are you? Tell us who you are, and then let us relate to you as you want to be related to. And I think we know that very well in our 2SLGBTQIA community.
So
I can remember the first time I heard the term queer and feeling very offended, because I grew up at a time with, that queer boy, you know. I remember oh, the kids are calling themselves queer today. I mean, you know, it just, it took an adjustment for me because that was like nigger when I was growing up. So, you know, language is individual. How one wants to self-identify is something and should be respected. But it was a big adjustment to hear queer.
I think thank you, my wonderful panel members. I think this is an important conversation to have. And I particularly like this notion of about language being the dance, the navigational dance, and asking people to identify who they are. Because the one thing that we can see when we look at the different terms, Michelle talked about the word crone and how you wanted to grow up to be one, right? And how the queer has changed and means different things to different generations. That's because language is socially constructed, right? And that is also sometimes time-bound and reflects history of where we are and where we are at the given point in time. And because these words are constructed, i.e. we get together and we fashion and carve out meaning, whether it's negative or positive, right? And reflecting the circumstances in which they're created, that's what makes it a minefield, right? And so the very first thing that I want to share with those who are listening wherever you are is first lesson, if there hasn't been one up until this point, and that is ask people who they are and how they want to be identified, right? It's as simple as meeting me for the first time and asking me what your name is, right? And then that way we show respect for others, just as the same way that we would have respect for ourselves. So sticking with that topic about the social construction of stuff, right? We talk about aging as being socially constructed, right? i.e. what it means to be old and to age is socially constructed. Because if we just looked at biology, right, we'd still fall into trouble, but we would mostly be safe. But why, for instance, would you be horrified if an 85-year-old wanted to wear an itsy-bitsy yellow polka dot bikini? It's got nothing to do with age, right? That's social construction, because somewhere in our heads, we've decided that that's not appropriate for that age, right? So I want you all to think in terms of how we have constructed the term aging and how that increases marginalization of older adults within the context of our society.
I think that, well, you know, I can remember when I was young and realizing that the LGBTQIA spirit community was youth focused. And that wasn't where I was coming from. My first mentors and my first partners were older. I didn't have a father. So I never carried that prejudice with me. I just didn't. I was aware it was there. I was very aware it was there. I just didn't have it. I just wanted to say that. I didn't, in my youth, I never felt they over there. No, in fact, I was attracted to wisdom, to guidance, and to nurturing, because we didn't have internet. we didn't have any of this stuff.
Yeah. So thank you, gentlemen. So think about this in terms of aging being a blessing and a curse, right? In inverted commas. So a lot of times in my classes, most of my students think that aging is a time for, disease, deprivation, and death, right? And I know, and I try to share with them, right, that old age is just like every other time in life, right? So there's things that make us sing and soar, and there are things that bring us down, like every other stage of life. So there's always a blessing and a curse, because I think that in life, and you feel free to disagree with me, we have benefits and we have burdens, and those two things always go hand in hand. So thinking about your experience, specifically as two-spirit LGBTQIA people, right? What would you consider to be the blessings that have come with aging and the not so blessing things that have come with aging?
The first thing,
Hi.
go ahead, Trudy.
Are you sure? Okay. Hi, I'm Trudy. I think one of the, the unfortunate being American Indian,
Mhm.
identifying as a transgender woman of color, is the labels. Growing up, I encountered transphobia, where where I feel that my voice wasn't heard, my presence in spaces wasn't acknowledged, and therefore um, um, I was led to believe that my life was not of an importance. And I say that because a lot the average transgender woman of color lifespan is 35 years old. And I'm very fortunate to have lived 20 years past that. And when I hear that, I feel very blessed because I am one of those few that got to see 50 years old. And I think about all of my trans women of color that weren't fortunate. And I think over on the positive side of it is really looking at educating and advocating for myself and my community, but also going into spaces that are often occupied by cisgendered heterosexual, where advocating for inclusive policies and just trying to be the voice. So I create a welcome atmosphere for the next generation. That's my response to that.
So that's great. Thank you so very much. So I like the fact that you brought into this conversation the issue of intersectionality, right? So we know that, we know that old age, as it were, getting older, especially within our society, may not be the same for all societies, but this is pretty common, right? Is not the preferred option, right? So we had a conversation some time back, and I think Rachel was the one who said, talked about existence as resistance, right? And I shared at the time that I think that just being old, an old person, is in itself a form of resistance, right? It's your existence is resistance, because everything in our society seems set up to favor youth, right? As the gold standard for what we want to be, right? So if you don't believe that, just watch television, right? And you can see the different models of people who are aging, and then what happens and then the other side of it, which is, hey, one of my favorites, and I say that with inverted commas, adverts on television at one point was an older gentleman who was in an office and looked down and saw a new crop of staff coming, and they were all young. And then he went home and turned up the next day with a full head of dark hair. Dr. Neil, no fingers pointed there, right? Because when he looked at that group of people, what he thought was, oh my gosh, the youth brigade is coming. It's time for me to do something, right? And he dyed his hair. So old age already is a time of marginalization, unfortunately for us, because of the way that we structured our society and because of the way that we've constructed aging, right? But it's something that will happen to all of us if we're lucky. I want to talk about some of the other areas, right, that cause or that heighten or multiply jeopardy. So for instance, Trudy already talked about her experience. What is it like to be old and African-American, Asian, or female, right? Or to have a different sexual orientation? How do those two histories of marginalization, how do they interact together to determine what life is like on a daily basis? And what do we need to know about that?
One thing I want to say, first of all, growing older was a gift because I met my husband I met him at a place called Sage Center for Elder LGBTQ2S adults. I had made up my mind, living with the virus and having come this far, I was going to die alone. And there's this center in New York, in all the boroughs of the center. And I was going there to learn 21st century technology. And I started having dinner there. I met him. I also want to tell you, there are resources for those of us in the community who are in the process of growing older. And that was a gift to me. I never thought I would be married, never in a million years. And that was a gift that came from reaching this point of my life and through that resource center. I never would have imagined that to happen.
Thank you, Dermot. So anybody else want to talk about this? What I'm trying to get to is, because we talked about having this open, real conversations here. And what I want us to sort of capture and share with our audience is what it means to be living in our skin at this time of our lives, right? What is it that our society needs to know about the challenges as well as the opportunities? Because I really do firmly believe it's benefits and burdens. So what are the challenges and what are the opportunities that we need everyone to be aware of, even as we try to figure out how to make this land of old age a place that everyone can inhabit and a place where two-spirit LGBTQIA persons can thrive? Yes, Lavina?
I think that this might come with my being older and then being an activist for a long time. Mm-hmm. When I'm sitting in rooms of primarily cisgendered, heterosexual white people, I expect more. And I think that's a function of my age. I expect more and I demand more. My confidence is higher and my tolerance for pussyfooting around is lower. And so I'm more verbal, I'm more out there. And like I said, I expect more, and sometimes that does motivate people, and people give more. So that's something that I think is part of the opportunity, and the benefit of being older. And I have
also
a long list of the things that I don't like about aging. And I bet that they're going to be very common to a lot of other people's lists.
Okay.
And so, you know, we'll keep pursuing that. But I do find that also a benefit and opportunity is that people, how do I want to say it? They kind of lend me their ear. You know, they do look to me for something like the history or the lived experience, and that I enjoy that. And the storytelling, you know, all of that. And that helps me feel like I am belonging still in the community.
Yeah, I like that. I like the opportunity angle there and the sense of belonging, because that's particularly important. Michelle, I think I want to go to you because I think your hand was up, or at least I saw activity in your Zoom box.
Yeah, what I think about is resilience.
Yes.
You know, for Damon, who knew, and Damon is 10 years my senior, and he knew when he was 4. I knew when I was 8. You know, so we grew up in a time where it was like, I grew up Catholic. So I was going to go to hell because I knew that I was different. And I had to look in the dictionary to find the word. The word was homosexual. And I kept thinking, but I'm not a guy. But, you know, I knew I was something. But you know, so it was 1974 before the American Psychological Association said it was not a mental illness.
Right.
So when you grow up thinking you're going to die and go to hell, and you're going to end up in a mental institution, and you're never going to have children, and you're going to be homeless and all that stuff, you know, and to survive that and to not commit suicide, and too many of our young people are still committing suicide.
Yes, they are. Yes.
You know, to fight through that, we are resilient. When we get to this age, we are resilient, and don't mess with us because we are strong.
Michelle, thank you so much for mentioning the suicide. I was just in discussion with a writer from the New York Times. She said it is still happening. It is underreported. It's still happening.
And I would like to interject that although we know it's happening in our youth population, suicide, it's also happening in our older adults.
Exactly. Thank you so very much for bringing that up, Lavina. So I wanted, so it's those two things I wanted to sort of quickly address, right? We already know, and this is where when we talk about multiple jeopardy and the way things work together to increase marginalization and the negative outcomes of that, this is one of those areas. We already know that the highest rates of suicide are amongst older white men when you look at the elder population, right? And so if you then layer that and add on being a member of the 2SLGBTQIA population, you can see how you ratchet that up. So these are issues that we need to be thinking about. And then having walked and lived through a life of all that stigma and discrimination that Michelle's talking about, I think it's also a shame that we find older adults who in the later part of their lives find themselves being pushed back into the closet, either by design or because of the structures that are around. So I want us to sort of think about this. What sort of message, what would be your message if there was somebody sitting out there listening to this program and thinking, what can I do, right? What can I do? What are the issues that concern me? What would you point to? So that's the first one. And then it might be the same, and it might be different. We've talked about history here and the importance of storytelling. What's the message for the youth, right? So two things, and you can take either one or both. What do we want people to know in terms of the real pressures and needs of our population at this time in later life? And what do we want young people who are looking up to all of you in the panel, right? And thinking about the future, what is it that we need them to know?
Hi, this is Trudy. I think one of the crucial things within the Native community is how colonization has really made a tremendous impact in tribal communities. Christianity came in to convert and assimilate tribal members to believe that marriage is only between a man and a woman, and therefore individuals that were identified as two-spirit were basically killed off or swept under the rug. So therefore that history would not be shared. And also how individuals are so acculturated that they pick up these thoughts of being homophobic, transphobic, and not understanding how marriage equality is embraced off the reservation, and some tribes embrace it, but it's tribal members that are challenging tribal courts to accept them because they are enrolled tribal members. But I think in leadership, tribal leadership, a lot they're more of cisgendered politicians where they only think men and women, that's it. And just sharing the history that we existed long before colonization. We existed long before the Stonewall riot in New York City, and that our ancestors suffered a lot. But I think the takeaway message was how federal Indian policies came about, and it was the government's intent to erase us, to basically a form of genocide. But my ancestors were resilient, and we're still here today. So that's a message that I would like to convey to the younger generation about the actual true history that's not often shared in books.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trudy, and that's important. So you guys know this what keep coming back: history and storytelling and experience. And how do you know who you are, and how do you go forward if you don't know where you're coming from? And so just the importance of going back to our cultural roots and to understanding who we were before the change came, so that you can find that true peace and that root for authenticity. So that's great. Anybody else want to have anything they want to add to this conversation?
Well, I agree with Trudy. I know in the Black community, I would say the Black church has probably been one of the greatest crucifiers of our community and the youth. I also think it is important to know the overall history, and I think Michelle will agree with me that getting through the whole AIDS major crisis is what has affirmed us all as a community today. You'd be surprised the kids don't have any concept of what that was like at all. I'm talking about Two-Spirit history. I am talking about Black history. Kids have no sense from whence we have come. And Lavinia, you're right. The gay Black mayor in Maryland just committed suicide last week.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It is across the boards.
Mm-hmm.
So this is sad, right? And these are things that in 2020 we would have thought that we would be past, right? So whose responsibility is it? How do we get these messages to the people who need to hear them? Because it seems to me that it has to be really important for the survival and the protection of the Two-Spirit LGBTQIA community, because the people who are old today were young ones, you know, and in the same vein, those who are young will be old. So I always tell the young people, when you see an old person, you're looking at your future self if you are lucky. So you need to be invested in that population so that when you get there, it's a walk in the park, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get this message to our young members of our population, the younger members of our population? Whose job should it be to share that history and to share that storytelling? Because I think there's a lot that's missing. And at the same time, whose job, how do we share the resilience that I hear all of you talking about, right? So how do we share the history so that people know where, you know, the roads that have been walked before, and they also understand their heritage and just the value and the potency of what they're inheriting. And then how do we also show and teach them that those who have gone before are still here and are resilient, and so you can do this too. Whose job is that?
You share it whenever and whenever you can. When I think of Martin Luther King's birthday, I tell kids, you do realize there would have been no March on Washington without Bayard Rustin. I mean, you do realize, you do know he was a gay man, do you not? Okay, every chance we get. I remember when I spoke at Brooklyn College, I said, gee, if only every teacher teaching every subject would spend a portion of one lesson talking about someone from my community, there will be a slow awareness of our presence, importance, and a greater respect for us. Just, we have contributed across the spectrum. Every chance we get, we need to share it.
I see
Yeah,
something.
wherever you are,
Yes.
whoever you are out there, whoever watches this, wherever you are, you can do something. I was talking with a friend of mine, a longtime friend of mine. She's 84 years old, and her wife recently had passed away. Her wife had spent the last few years in a facility because of Alzheimer's. They had been married 37 years, but the staff kept calling her, "Oh, your friend is here to see you. Your friend is here to see you." 37 years. And they still couldn't quite figure out. They've been married, they're wives, so they're not significant others, and they just couldn't get the term right. But so wherever you are, if you're working in one of those facilities, if you're in education, if you're in healthcare, wherever you are, you can do something. Each of us can. I would challenge my own community, the LGBT community, the pride parades and all that stuff. Make a space for us and get that intergenerational thing going, because we have so much that we can share. I've got friends who are like, "Oh, I'm downsizing." And I'm thinking, I remember being poor. I remember living in my car. I remember having nothing. And wow, I could have used a blanket, or whatever. So there's so much that we can pass on. We can help our youth.
Yes, thank you. That is so powerfully said, and just on point, right? I think we don't. It's like everything else, and I think that's part of the baggage of marginalization, right? And that's part of that baggage of marginalization. How do we go out there, right, and boldly go, to steal Star Trek's phrase, where no person has gone before, when we're so used to looking over our shoulders and trying to be safe? Because if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the very basic level is that safety, right? And so if you don't feel safe there, then aspiring to all of these higher things then becomes a problem, because you have to deal with that first. And so I think we really need to push ourselves out of our comfort zone and realize that we do have the power. We have the power of the knowledge, we have the power of the experience, we have the power of the history, right? And we have the power of now, right? And so to step out. The other thing that I think that we should probably be talking a lot more about doing, especially in terms of healthcare and stuff like that, right? Because there are real, we sit now and we're talking about being a member of the 2SLGBTQIA community, where we haven't yet talked on things, serious issues like health disparities, right? Like what happens in healthcare encounters, like what happens in terms of access to social services, whether it's because you can't be your true self, and so people do not know what you need, or because you are so traumatized by a history of discrimination that you don't seek these things out, right? So there's further marginalization that comes about. So I think we need to do a better job of seeking out those places where, first things first, those people who are on the outside need to do a better job, because there are a lot of people who care. They need to do a better job of understanding the challenges and of putting out the flags that allow Two-Spirit LGBTQIA people know that they are welcome in that space, right? And then I think that members of this population also need to do a better job of sharing stories, of sharing where they find acceptance, right? Sharing healthcare providers that work well with them, sharing those stories, right? And that's how we spread that. That's how we spread that particular joy and make it contagious. What do you guys think? Am I just sitting on top of my mountain here, just spouting noise, or does any of this make sense?
Dr. Amanda, I wonder if we could invite Marshall Shore, who's in our virtual pew out there, to share just a wee bit about some of the work doing with the storytelling and the Two-Spirit LGBTQ communities. Marshall, are you willing to share a little bit about the amazing work that you're doing and partnering with AARP? Marshall? This is not choreographed. Okay, all right, you can mute yourself and just share a little bit about that so people know that there are stories that are being told, but we could tell more.
Yes, we can always tell more.
Marshall? Can we unmute Marshall?
I think he will have to be given a different link to come on as a panelist. He
Oh,
can't-
goodness. Okay. We will make sure that he did put the link in the chat. So we will make sure that people know that that link is available, and he's doing important work. He has a wonderful partnership with AARP, which is also joining us on the line tonight. And we are looking forward to more stories, but he's doing a lot here in Arizona relative to Arizona history and LGBTQIA Two-Spirit history. So just wanted to add that and acknowledge you, Marshall.
Thank you. I hope that we can get to hear Marshall's story. That would be awesome. So,
Dr. Shokan, I have several points. To answer your question, you're right on. So you're not just spouting off, or I think that there's, when you say whose job is it, I think it's all of our jobs, that the young people need to nurture their own value of history and intergenerational relationships. And we need to do the same. Also, I think a really important effort is to examine how we've internalized colonization, how we've internalized our class background or our race background, ethnicity, our ageism.
yes.
You know, society just gives us so much to take in, and we forget to spit it out and say, no, thank you. And
No,
we've got to encourage each other to make things, really reveal things, and also spit them out and say, yeah, I'm not going to buy into that anymore. And here is a direction that I see, because I know people, or I've heard stories and all of those things, and I can make a different choice. So I think that that's an important piece. Storytelling and history, we know that there are archives in different parts of the country. We have one, we have the Arizona Queer Archives that is housed here at the University of Arizona. And we have lots of stories on there. Plus we have stuff, you know, people have donated their journals and their letters and, you know, memorabilia. We also have a couple of storytelling groups here in Tucson, and I know that they're in other parts of Arizona and around the country. So what we need to do is make sure people know about them and how to access them, and encourage people to go and listen to those stories. Also, Southern Arizona Senior Pride, on our YouTube channel, we have stories that are there for people to enjoy. So, I mean, I think that we are all working hard. Maybe us as an older generation know that, you know, we had people who came before us.
yes.
And we know some of that history, but we do not know all of that history. And some of that history is lost. And I think we feel it, and it's painful that we want to know, you know, who came before, what did they do? What risks did they take? And what successes did they have? And so we want to get those in place for not just ourselves, but for future generations, and for universities and high schools. And, you know, eventually they're going to start teaching LGBTQ2S history in the high schools eventually, and they're going to need to find that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Lavina. And I think it's like everything else. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. And I know, for instance, that at the College of Public Health, we have a master's student, and and they raised a lot of issues about our curriculum, right? And the sort of examples that we were given. We are the College of Public Health, right? And so we are looking at our public at the College of Public Health, and we're shifting that. We're looking at the public and we're asking that question, who is in our public, right? And so if we are public health professionals, then what we do should touch every aspect, every group within our public. And we didn't have examples of LGBTQIA, never mind two-spirit cases in our curriculum. And so we're beginning that conversation, but it took a student to raise their hand and say, excuse me, why do I not see myself represented here? And so we're going to have to do a whole lot more. Someone's drumming, I'm not sure if they're trying to catch my attention. So we're going to have to do a whole lot more about those kinds of things. I know that going through the PhD, I was told, and it's very true, that it's important for students to look at their faculty and see themselves, right? Because that's how you know that this is possible. And so we need to get to a point where we have normalized things so that when we look around, we see the richness of our community in all of its stripes, right? And that's going to take collaboration. You know, it's not oh, let's be two-spirit LGBTQIA people do that because it's their issue. And it's our issue, because sooner or later, when any group is marginalized, they're coming for you, right? And if nothing else gets you, then old age will, right? And at that point, it might be too late to do something about it. So we're getting close to time, and I really want to, yes. Did you want to say something, Trudy?
Yes,
Okay, yes.
just real quickly is, as a young child attending Indian boarding school, every day after school, we had an hour spent over with the elders. The elders would talk to us over in Navajo and share stories over the teachings. And I remember every day I look forward to that. And my takeaway from those things was that as Native people, we're going to go out into society, and people are going to judge us on the color of our skin, and they're going to label us. But then I also looked at it was, okay, I am now in the city as a two-spirit transgender woman, and then therefore, when I return home to help my people, I gave back by breaking down barriers, by being, by following the teachings of my elders when they said, go out there and get an education, learn the white man's way, bring it home and help our people. So with that, I was actually the first openly Navajo transgendered woman to run for the highest office on the Navajo Nation as the Navajo Nation presidential candidate. And with that experience, traveling throughout the reservation, I met young Navajo two-spirit LGBT individuals, and some of them did not identify with the acronym. So they were coming up to me and thanking me and saying, I never thought I would see this in my life. But to plant that seed and encourage them, to let them know that it's okay to be who you are. The whole world is out there and you can be whatever you want to be. And that was my message to them. And with that, I was very fortunate when the Labriola Center at ASU reached out, and which I donated all of my campaign collection over for future researchers over to look at. So that is like my contribution back over to my people. Thank you.
I love that. Giving back taking, going out, collecting the harvest, and taking it back home and rebuilding and starting. So very quickly, because I know that you never know who's sitting, and I very firmly believe in appealing to prophets that you may not know that you have. Some of the big issues facing Two-Spirit LGBTQIA older adults, right, are very similar to those that you can imagine face older adults generally. But then there's some specific things that we have to pay attention to, right? So long-term care, and Dr. Lester talked about that, long-term care and how we choose to live the end of our lives, that's important, right? Being able to get access to social services in a way that's meaningful for the individual. We keep talking about person-centered care in this country, and we don't do it. To be person-centered for Two-Spirit LGBTQIA populations is not possible without understanding the history and the lived experience of these individuals, right? So that we need to deal with these things. We need to think about finances, and we need to think about the way we structure our societies going forward, right? So those are big issues. We need policy, we need legislation, we need advocacy, we need people on every side, right, of the arena to work on this. Right? The other thing that I think is important for us to talk about, right? I like stories, I'm African, so I like stories, but I remember something that a white friend, German heritage, told me when I first came to the United States 20-something years ago. Our two daughters were friends. And she told me that you have to talk to your children about the things that are important. That if you don't talk to your child about race, about sexual identity and sexual orientation because you think that it doesn't apply to you, or because you're like, I'm not prejudiced, you know, and that doesn't matter. Your children are not going to pick up on that. They're going to assume that you don't care, or that whatever messages they get from outside is true. Because, and if you're a parent, you know this, because we're so busy telling them the things we don't want them to do. So if you don't talk about it, your children either think you don't care or it's not important. And so I've always kept that with me. It's important for us as members of the community, and you don't have to be biological parents. We all of us parent people in different ways. We need to be more open about talking about these issues, about explaining to young people, because they're going to grow older, about why these things are important. And we need to win the battle of the hearts and minds, because those are our foot soldiers growing up. But before we close this panel, I want to end on a high note, because that's the only way to go out. So I'm going to ask you all, I'm going to go around robin, and I want you to tell all of us something that's phenomenal about you as an older adult. So I'm going to start with Michelle, because your smile's so big, and then we'll just walk away around.
Oh gosh, phenomenal about me. I am more kind and more helpful and just more genuine because I've aged and I've made it through all this, and I've seen it so many different ways. You know, I've got that 360-degree perspective now.
Yes. So I have to ask you, because you put this out there, do you think you've managed to get to be a crow?
I think I have. I think I have.
I think you have. I think you have. I think you have. Thank you, Michelle. So who wants to go next? I'm trying not to do my teacher thing where I call people out. Who wants to go next? Okay, Trudy, please.
I'll go next. My end note is I have more confidence in myself to walk into a room and shake up the room with my voice, and also hold people accountable, and to not to be tokenized.
Yeah.
And therefore I feel that my presence to be embraced, as well as of my lived experience, because I'm the only one that knows what I went through, instead of learning it out of a textbook, because personal lived experience really hold value. That'd be my response.
Personal lived experience really holds value. Very well said. Thank you so much, truly. Damon, you want to go?
Like I said, I'm grateful to be here. I never thought I would live to see 72. So every day is a gift. I have a wonderful husband and home. That is beyond my wildest expectation and belief. So a great deal of gratitude.
A great deal of gratitude. Thank you so very much. And last but by no means least, Lavina.
Thank you. I think that I would want to say that I am more profoundly compassionate for all of the human beings that I live with on this earth than I've ever been. I think that's a function of age and also lived experience. And also that I am persevering. So those are two qualities that I think I would give myself.
Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I feel really honored to be with this group of people. I thank Dr. Lester and his team for setting this up. I just want to say that being old in our society is a humongous challenge. When we talk about the challenges that face older adults just generally, right? There's so many hoops that they have to jump over. There's so many issues, right? And so if you can imagine, when you take even the most privileged group and they suffer in old age because they're marginalized, can you then imagine what it must be like to lay over that other traditions of marginalization and all the histories of marginalization that has happened, that has occurred to people, which they then bring to later life? So even if you are not a member of the Two-Spirit LGBTQIA community, right? If your aspiration is to be old one day, this stuff is going to jump up and bite you. And that is going to be difficult. And so our society, right? As the World Health Organization talks about building societies where everyone can thrive regardless of age, right? And that is regardless of age and this other thing and that other thing and whatever that X is. It behooves us as a community to put our hands together to ensure that regardless of who we are,
Right,
where we're from, what we do, and what choices we make with our lives, that when we get to that land of old age, we can put our burdens down, we can rest a while, and we can live out the rest of our lives in the way that we want to. And so I thank you all for listening to us, and I wish you all a good night. Dr. Lester, over to you.
oh my gosh. So who that person that told me it was going to be fun doing something else certainly missed a treat tonight, because I went in so many directions with so much compassion and so much insight. I want to remind us, and so thank you all panelists. Thank you, Dr. Amanda, for navigating this very complicated landscape. And I just want to bring us back to this notion where we started with this notion of humanity and the ways in which if we are going to talk about justice and we're going to talk about equity and we're going to talk about diversity, we have to make sure that everyone's humanity is at the center of that conversation. So I draw you back to where we sort of opened with Alicia when we talked about our Humanity 101, compassion and empathy and forgiveness, integrity, kindness, respect, and self-reflection. So I love what we've talked about. This has been a gift. This has been a gift for me. We have talked about in Project Humanities, joy as a radical act. I can see aging as a radical act when you embrace that and you can release all these cares about whether I should dye my beard or dye my hair. Just living itself, Damon and Trudy, is a gift. I think until we understand the rawness of that, then it's hard for us to sort of embrace life and what it offers right now, the immediacy of now. So I am not going to go behind those wonderful testimonials. I am going to go ahead and talk about the ways in which I have blossomed and learned from this conversation. And I hope that you will continue to see these conversations as the hallmark of what Project Humanities does at Arizona State University. So I am going to remind people that we have lots of conversations that sort of bring us to this point of leaving with something that we didn't have when we came in. So please, please, please do whatever you do to follow us on the social media platforms. Tell somebody about this if you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed anything or learned anything or something is resonating with you, please, please go out and tell people that you experienced something and had a good time, talking about real stuff, talking about critical issues. But we also want you to realize that if you didn't sort of enjoy anything, then just keep your mouth closed and just keep it to yourself. We will ask you to sign our Humanity 101 pledge. It is just asking you to be mindful. It's not asking for any money. It's not asking for anything. But we're also going to send you a resource email. Several people, I know Bill was asking, can we see the chat? Can we, where's the resource list? We will send that. So if you've got other suggestions, please send those our way. We want this to be a conversation that doesn't stop here, but rather is ignited here. So I thank all the panelists, I thank the facilitator, I thank all of you for joining us and staying with us, and that you will continue to follow what Project Humanities is doing, because we're out here trying to do some good work. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Neil, before we go, I must say this. I recently started performing again, and I was thinking of getting my hair dyed. And so I went to a friend of mine and I said, the last time I got it dyed, it turned out purple.
Mm.
And she said, well, doesn't that tell you something? just leave it.
Yes. Well, and that's what I've chosen to do. And so I'm gonna let it gray. It's like Frozen said, and this is not gray shaming. This is really about my recognizing that I've internalized these attitudes about aging also. So please, 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 let's keep something about tonight sort of fresh in our minds, so that whatever we do tomorrow will be a reflection of something that we have learned or understood and challenged to think differently about. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to ask the panelists to remain in the room as the others exit, so that we